Hey guys, welcome back. We're looking at another covered hopper weathering video here, and I'm going to kind of keep this one, try to keep it kind of short if I can. It's just going to more of be a run through, not so much a how-to again here. This one's going to be a little bit more, kind of a little bit more complex than a few of my more normal weathering projects. This one is a pretty cool one. Finally picked this one up today. It's a Pillsbury PTLX scheme. They're really cool two-tone. Classic 70s covered hopper by Pullman standard. These are Intermountain cars, and I like the Intermountains over the Tangents because they have less detail and they're a little bit more durable. The Tangents are nice cars. I have a couple Tangents myself, but they break off parts all the time when you're weathering them. The Intermountains, I can drop that like that, nothing broke off, They are a little bit more sturdy. Not that I recommend you go dropping your models, but that was just an example. So, I can play around with something like this, not have anything happen to it. They're a little bit more forgiving as I work around with them, because as you guys know, I do a lot of heavy weathering and things like that. Well, in this particular case, I found an example of these Pillsbury cars that I wanted to model, and if we take a look at the prototype, it is this one. Take a look. And I know the photo quality, it's not actually too bad. If we take a look, if you see, it's the two-tone car, so it's got the black on the ends and on the underbase, but the sides are that light blue. It's kind of faded down to a light gray, as you can see. Now, a lot of these cars are interesting. They pretty much all have this Pillsbury lettering, and it pretty much always goes to white. So in this case, with this particular car, we're going to kind of wait till we get the rust done. What my plan is I'm going to rust up the sides. Then I'll come back and I'll hand paint each individual letter with a little bit of white oil, and then I'll layer another light layer of rust back over them to kind of blend them in a little bit, and that's how I'll tackle that. So it's actually pretty easy to achieve that ghost lettered look. As for the placard, some of these cars have that placard, others don't. In this particular case, the Pillsbury logo is completely gone and it's been patched. I'm not sure if IMTX did that or if it was its previous owner, but you can see the placard has been painted this light blue color. So on my model, I will have to paint that. I will have to do a little bit of careful patchwork to prevent the data and things like that from getting messed up. You can see my car is IMTX 7617. I'll have to patch the ends, do a ton of rust work, all kinds of good stuff like that. I got to modify the bays on this one as well, because the Intermountain cars come with the long hatch gates. So what I like to do is just take nail clippers and trim those down. Once you do that, you get something like this. This is another car I'm kind of working on at the same time. This is an MWCX unit I'm custom painted. Here you can see the modified gates there, where I've trimmed those down. And they could use a little bit more detail, but I just kind of keep it simple to make these cars a little bit easier. So you just trim the gates down, and that solves that problem. So we know how we're going to do the lettering, we know how we're going to do the placards. If we look at the other part of the car, pretty much the entire underbody is grimed up. The ends are grimed up, you have your standard kick-up, and then of course this roof on this car is going to be rusted completely to hell. This is a salt car, so this is going to be pretty heavily rusted up, as you'll see. Again, I'm not going to show every individual little process of weathering this thing. I'm going to just kind of give you a basic run through of what I'm doing, and I'll kind of show you after I've done it. In this particular case, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to probably spray some white on the black. Same thing with the ends, because we need to fade that down because it's too dark. So we're going to fade that down first. Once we do that, then we can come back, reload the airbrush with grime. We'll spray the entire top hatch area, we'll spray the roof area, the roof walks, and then the underbody and underbays with our rust. All the stuff on the side on this prototype we're going to do with oils and washes, so we're not going to try to touch that with airbrush. We're going to do that with brush techniques, kind of trying to replicate that rust as best as we can. I'm pretty confident with this. This is the first time I've done a Pillsbury, but I think we can pull it off pretty well here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the trucks. I'm going to cut the trip pins off the Cadies, and then I'm going to paint the brake wheel, because the brake wheel is now black on this car. Obviously this would have probably gotten replaced at some point or just repainted, so I'm going to paint that black. I'm going to get the airbrush out real fast. I'll spray and fade this down, and fade that up, and then I'll spray the grime. So I'll show you the fade first, and then we'll come back and look at the grime. And if any of you guys want to watch and see how I do my airbrush mix, I just basically like to use Anita's acrylic paints. I mix them with 71% isopropyl alcohol, and I just run them in my airbrush. I get a kind of basically a skim milk consistency with my airbrush paints, mix them up, and then I spray them. It's very easy to do, and if you want, again, a little bit more comprehensive look at my airbrush work, just go back and watch some of my older videos, like my more recent one of my what is it, the Furix salt car I show a little bit more in detail with my airbrush. But for these videos, it kind of gets a little redundant, showing the exact same technique over and over again, so I'm just going to kind of keep it at the meat and potatoes of this weathering. So we'll go ahead and fade this part down here, and I'll come back and show you what it looks like. Here I just sprayed it, and that was a very light dusting. It was literally just a quick spray on both sides, and you can see it already made a world of difference. We now have the correct color. It's kind of grayed out a little bit. It's faded down, and if we look at the ends, you can see that has nicely transitioned over into what we need it to be. And so now all this is prepped for the grime work, and it's going to be the same exact preparation. I'm just going to take my airbrush, set 40 psi. I'm going to use some excuse me, earth brown, and we're just going to spray that excuse me, and that'll give us the color that we need. So I'm just going to do that real quick. We'll take care of that. Again, we're using 70% isopropyl alcohol. I don't recommend you guys use 90% because it'll start separating your paint. 70% is perfect for diluting the paint down, especially with acrylic, and also Model Master acrylics, by the way, just as an example. This kind of acrylic is another thing I use all the time. Now this stuff gets really tacky after a while, so you got to use it when it's fresh, but if you're running it through the airbrush, the 70% is perfect for this paint as well. So it's not just the craft acrylic you use that for. The 70% will also work really well with Model Master, but I never really talked about that. Maybe one down the road I'll kind of try to demonstrate some airbrush stuff where I use more of this paint, but it's the same application, but it sprays beautifully with 70% isopropyl alcohol. So anyways, I'm going to set that aside. This is the next color we need to switch to, and I'm going to be using straight earth brown. But for some cars you can of course mix in a little bit of black, make it a darker brown color for a heavier rust tone, but for this it's going to be pretty much a straightforward, just a nice light rust color to spray on the bays, on the ends. And again, just remember with your airbrushing, the rust on these cars is going to be concentrated on those end platforms where the kick-up spray from the wheels comes up. I know I say that all the time, but that's what you need to focus on. If you do it like that, like I do, you'll get it right every time. You always get really great results doing it that way. Same thing with this end, and then of course I'll be concentrating the rust all over the top here as well, and we'll of course enhance it with oils as well. So let me go ahead and get that sprayed, and I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, well here's how it's really starting to transform now. If you look at the top, it's completely rusted up. It's kind of hard with this lighting, but you can see it's completely painted dark rust, and this is a perfect base color for oils. If you were just going to do airbrush work, this is also perfect. Notice that I've kind of lightly done around the hatch area too. Mainly keep in mind where a lot of that rust and rot is going to be, especially on a salt car, but grain cars get this too, where that rust is going to build up mainly on the top and then it starts to break down the side of the car. Also on the ends, if you look, you got the kick-up spray lines, which are still setting up. Under bays are nicely sprayed up and built up, so we got a nice rust layer to get us started with this model. From this point on, it's actually going to be relatively straightforward. We're just going to do some light grime washes down the side, and then basically that'll be the preparation for the heavy rust and oil work that we're going to do. We'll also have to get the patchwork done on the side, prep the panel here, and do some other minor things like that, but this is actually rolling along quite a bit, and we've gotten quite a significant portion of this project done in the first 20 minutes alone. So again, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, so we're just going to keep going here. If you look at the underbays of this car, you can see the mud splatter caked up on there. Pretty common. So on the model real quick, I went ahead and just replicated that and got that out of the way. You can see I did like a splatter. I took a wet brush and I scraped it across the wet paint, and that gave me the splatter effect where it's being splattered up against the bays. Same thing with on the ends. You can see there's lots of good mud splatter. So the ends are pretty much prepped. We'll come back and fill those in with some powders later, but right now it's pretty much primed up pretty well. I'm not going to be doing any real oil work down here, not too much anyway. The prototype, at least in this picture, the bays are kind of that dry, chalky, older rust. The sides, moreover, we're going to be using the oil and the end cages because there's a lot of fresher rust. So that's what we need to replicate. What I'm going to go ahead and work on now is the preparation of preparing areas for patchwork, masking stuff off. For example, this little data board here, I got to mask that off on my model. I'm going to mask off the lube stencils right there. Okay. Then there's this little decal here that's also on my model that I got to mask off. Then we're going to work on the placard. And as far as I can tell, both sides of this car, the placard is completely painted out, and you can tell too because the blue paint does not match what's on the car body, where the car body is grayed out. So that was actually must have been some kind of paint work they did. So I'm going to go ahead and replicate that now. So what I'm going to accomplish here now, paint the Pillsbury logos, do the masking on the data, like that, and let me double check here. Oh, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just scrape off that too. If you look at the prototype again, on the patchwork, there actually isn't a number there anymore, an existing number. Granted, it's covered in graffiti, but you can't see it, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. So basically, we'll do all the masking work, paint our placard, and then we can get into the fun part, the rust. We'll do the first layer of rust, probably a second layer, then we'll come back and finish our paint patchwork. We'll clean up the ribs, and then we'll paint the Pillsbury lettering white, both sides. We'll peel the masking back up, do some more paint patchwork, lightly weather over those decals we masked over, blend everything together, and we should have a finished model. So a little bit of a change up in plan here, and what happened was I was going to do the placards, and I realized that they were kind of thick and kind of clunky on the car body. The other thing was on the prototype, the logos are actually completely peeled away and then they painted over them. So the placard is just essentially the large sheet metal panel painted blue, and there's no logo anymore underneath all that paint. The problem that I found using the stock pieces was even when I painted over them, the logo is still somewhat visible, and I was going to sand these down, but this plastic is so soft that it started getting eaten away, so I decided maybe try a different option, and also try to make it a little bit more prototypical, and also help me in the sake of weathering by just removing the panels altogether and replacing them with better, more prototypical parts. So I actually scratched up a couple of these panels. You can see these are much more thin profile. This is a styrene sheet. They'll just go back on there once we get the sides weathered up. But the great thing about having the panels also removed is now we can do the rust on each individual panel, and we don't have to try to work around that panel. So that's the benefit there. So that's going to get us caught up on where we are with the panels. These are pretty much prepped and ready to go for weathering after they're reinstalled. However, where we're at now is actually trying to replicate the rust, and this is where I'm kind of hung up on. As you can see, I tried to do an additional layer of rust with oils first, and it did not work at all. It looks like pretty much absolutely terrible. You can see all the brush strokes. Even though I tried to work it out, the paint kept lifting off. So I realized too that the paint, or the rust tone on this car, is very dark, and what I should have done was actually outline this with an airbrush coat first to make it look kind of chunky, then follow behind with the oils. So as you can see, I make mistakes too here, guys, but this is fixable. So I'm going to try to adjust this a little bit. What I've done is I've worked on a little bit of acrylic mix here with a little bit of earth brown and some black mixed up with a little alcohol. I'm going to try to spray this kind of roughly on the sides, and I'm going to try to get a halo effect. You can kind of see areas where the paint is, where you can see that rust is kind of see-through. Not paint, I don't know why I keep saying paint, but you can see it's kind of this halo effect. So I just want to kind of blotch it on, but layer it kind of thick. Then I'll be able to actually follow behind with the oils and streak it down right across that acrylic work. Of course, once we spray the acrylic work from the airbrush, I'll seal it in, then do the oils, because I can't put oils over the airbrush work. But I gotta fix it mainly on this side. On the opposite side, we still have a clean slate, so this will be easier. But what I'm going to try to do is I'll just do the airbrush work, fix this problem here, then I'll start painting in the white lettering, and I might show that real quick, so we'll see what that looks like. But first I'm going to do the airbrush work. This is what all this looks like after I've airbrushed it with my weathering mix here, and I'm keeping this standing by just in case I make a mistake. But as you can see, we now have the mostly correct color on the car body sides, and this will now be ready to just get a layer of oil to finish it up. So we actually have kind of solved that problem. Now, the thing I want to go ahead and show you guys here, which is kind of detailed, notice how it's very streaky and you have cleaner parts of the car, and it's very, you kind of see what I mean, where you kind of see these clean spots in the paint. Sorry I can't talk, I'm just really tired. This is a very raw run through here, but I'm just trying to get it done. But you can kind of see how the rust is very wavy, and you have these areas where it's kind of cleaner. It's sort of revealing the underlying paint underneath that rust. Well, we're going to have to try to replicate that here, and it's a little bit tricky, but you're looking at this and you're thinking, how the hell am I going to do that? Well, let me show you what I've done on the opposite side. We've been able to achieve that. And right now you're asking yourself, Danny, how the hell did you do that? Well, let me show you. The trick now is that we have fresh acrylic paint on the sides of this thing. It's not sealed in, and that's important. You don't want to go in and start sealing this in right away. What we're going to do, take a wet Q-tip, right, just like this. Notice these scratched up areas here. If we get in real close, those are areas where I actually started to peel some of that paint off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and I'm just going to kind of randomly choose certain little areas where I'm going to kind of scrape some of that paint back away, just gently, to kind of re-reveal some of the areas underneath. And this is going to give us that interesting shading effect where some of that paint can still be seen underneath. It gives us that chunky effect. If you accidentally take too much off, don't worry about it too much. We can correct some of this with oil. Now, this is a very forgiving technique, but that being said, you can overwork this like that. That's overworked. That's too much. You can still see some of that paint. So now what I'm going to have to do is kind of try to blend that in a little bit, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but if you can try to avoid it, you kind of want to. But even right there, that was a little aggressive. I'll just try to kind of blend it out. Just kind of adjust the way you do it on the sides. Certain panels on this car are heavier rusted than others, and I'm just kind of, again, trying to refer to kind of my prototype pictures to get an idea of what's rustier. But just kind of go in, pull certain areas of that paint just back up, and you kind of have a cleaner slate to kind of stir it up. And this is a technique that you can use for quite a number of different cars. Tons of these old co-op cars rust like this. The yellow ones, blue ones, excuse me, green ones, black ones. You again see this kind of weathering variation quite a bit. So this is kind of an easy and a fun way to replicate that. But again, the thing you got to keep in mind is not to work this too much. You got to kind of keep it, really just get it to a point where you're happy with it and stop. Don't keep going, because you will burn through this paint really quick. Even oils. Again, I'm just going to kind of finish this little end here. Clean a certain spot up. Peel it up. Done. Now, the next thing we need to do is clean the ribs. Real quick, refer to the prototype photos. Notice the ribs on these cars. They're always clean. Most of them are. They usually are the raised surface of these panels, those ribs. When they stick out, not as much rust is going to run down on these. You'll usually see scrapes, scratches, and rust pits. But for the most part, the rust is going to be concentrated on that panel. So, now we got to clean these off. And this is where things start looking a lot better. So, in this particular case, earlier I used oil. This is the side that I put all that oil paint on. If this was just straight acrylic, all you got to do, no problem. Use a little bit of water on your Q-tip, clean it right off. But because I used oil earlier and it's had a few hours to dry, I need to just go ahead and step up to the big guns and use 70% isopropyl alcohol to carefully scrub these ribs back off. Again, be careful to try not to get this alcohol. Like, some of it, as you can see, is going to get on that panel. There's only so much you can do about that. Don't sweat too much. Try to avoid it if you can. If you leave some scrapes like that one there, We can fix that. If you gotta fix it, you gotta fix it, but just try to be careful. Work kind of quickly, but slowly. Also, when you're doing this, don't put an extreme amount of pressure on this Q-tip. You're literally just letting it glide across that surface. Same way if you were cleaning off reporting marks, something like that. You really just let the Q-tip just gently slide across it. It'll lift that paint up. The paint will give. It's not sealed in. Even if it's oil, it'll come up. Now if you're using, let's say, regular oil, not water mixable, here this is crucial. This will only really work if it's water mixable oil. If it's anything else, regular oil for example, then you might need to use thinner, but thinner has a higher chance of kind of spreading all over the car body and making a mess and leaving a residue too. So you got to be careful. That's why I kind of recommend you use the water mixable. They're easier to work with. But again, just kind of pay attention to how I'm just really gently caressing the side here, just cleaning that paint up one rib at a time, just like this. Okay, that's good enough for the demonstration. You kind of get the idea, the basic gist of this. But again, if you look at that, you got that really cool rust effect, and this will of course look way better once we get all of this covered with oil. Now again, if you make mistakes like this patch here, these are kind of rough, I might go in with the airbrush and kind of smooth this out. Matter of fact, let's do that real quick. Just again, I make mistakes just like everybody else, and this is why I save my airbrush. Let's just kind of try to blend that back in, maybe just a little bit, not too much. Try to kind of fan it back out, soften it back up. Let it just disappear back into the side, and look at that. We fixed it. That's how easy it is and how forgiving these paints can be. They are your friends. They will work with you if you treat them well. I know that sounds Bob Rossi, but it kind of is true. Anyways, again as a reference, this is what the opposite side looks like once we've done this technique. This is prepped and ready for oil. So in the next step, I'll be layering on the oil, and we'll see what that looks like. Again, before I do that though, make sure once you're happy with your acrylic work, seal this in with one good coat of Tester's clear dull coat. In particular dull coat. Make sure it's not gloss coat. You can use, of course, Tamiya dull coat. If you're spraying through an airbrush, you can use your airbrush, whichever. Just make sure it's a dull coat coating to make sure all this is protected before you do any oil work. Here's what it looks like now. So I just kind of kept the ribs clean again, but I went in and layered on the oils, and you can see that you get that fine streaking effect, and some of it's kind of haloed, and then you can also see some of that, again, the paint underneath. So I think it looks pretty good, and it's good preparation. Rusted up the step ladders there. So the next thing we need to do now is go ahead and paint our white and ghost letter the Pillsbury logos basically. So I'm going to paint those. I'll let that dry up, and while that dries up, I'll be able to move on to the opposite side this weekend, and I'll be able to start doing this side as well. Basically repeat that. And again, with the oils, you gotta always remember that they need quite a bit of time to dry up, and that's why I'm kind of working one side at a time. You don't want to try to rush something like this. You just want to do one little bit at a time, take off small chunks in a big project like this, and make it all manageable, basically. So I'll show you what the white looks like when I'm done. And again, I'm using the, let's see here, the titanium white, Winsor & Newton water mixable oil. I'm going to use a fine tip brush to apply this, and that'll make it real easy. So I'm going to go ahead and use that. Again, you can use white acrylic if you like for this, but the white oil will be nice and thin. I can pull it up and work with it a little bit more, and it'll stay nice and thin and even, but coat really well, and it'll also not show brush strokes. Okay, alright, so this is about another hour's worth of work. Really didn't think it would take that long to do that, but that was quite a pain. Anyways, it's filled in now, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. It's a little see-through still. What I'm going to do is let this set up kind of overnight. I'm going to wait till it gets tacky, and in the morning I'm going to hit it with a little bit more oil, but I'm going to do a real thin wash of oil, and that'll smooth everything out. The paint will flow a little bit better in that area, and it will smooth out, of course. Now, the other thing you got to remember, once you've done this, make sure you seal this in. including all the other oil work, because I'm going to be doing one more final, a very thin wash of rust. Referring to our prototype photos again, if we look, you can see on the Pillsbury lettering, it is starting to rust over a little bit. Right, so we need to replicate that. I'm also ready to go ahead and reinstall our placards right there. And again, these are prepped and ready to go, so I'll be gluing these on tomorrow as well. Excuse me. But you can see I also removed the masking in that area, and I cleaned up the COTS blocks there. So that's prepped and ready to go. And then I'm also going to do the patch for the INTX logo there and the lettering, and I'll do that all tomorrow, so that'll be the next thing. So overnight I'm going to let this kind of set up, and I'll seal it up with dull coat, and then I'll move on to the next step. It's now been a few days, and I've let the white oil paint dry on both sides. There you can see that. I've painted the patchwork again, both sides, so that's prepped. I've painted the patchwork on this side as well, so that's also prepped. And the panels have been reinstalled, and as you can see, I've treated them with the oil, so they have the rust pitting now, the scratching according to the photos. Now what's important with the white logos here is that you let these dry thoroughly for at least a day or two before you seal them in. Make sure that oil sets up real well, because it'll still be kind of tacky. And once it sets up, clear coat your entire car. Then what you can do is come back, and then we'll be able to subdue these a little bit more by doing a very light oil wash on the side to blend them out a little bit, because remember in the photo these do have a little bit of rust kind of on them. So this is the side I haven't done, and this is the side I'll be using for the demonstration. And you don't need too much oil for this, just use a small light brush. You can just kind of go in here, and I just take like fine brush like this, take a little bit of oil at a time, start with whatever letter you want really. In this case, let's just do the Y down here. Put a little bit on at a time, and then just kind of blend it out. If you want to do this a few times, you can as well. You can kind of build up the streaking, but I'm really only going for a one overcoat. Some of these, again, I might do a bit of a heavier wash on. Like that R, for example, that might need a little bit more paint. Some of these letters are a little bit more rusted than the others, depending on where all the rust streaking is, because again this side has quite a bit of car body rot, substantially at this point. So I'm just trying to kind of vary that wash and just try to kind of keep it smooth and just build something like this up just in layers at a time. And don't overwork this, because even though we did seal this in, you do pose a risk of potentially burning through that white oil and peeling it up underneath, which would be bad. So I'm just going in here, working one small layer at a time, and really just do this until you're happy with it. The next time you see this car, I'll go ahead and have put on the safety striping, and I'm going to go ahead and throw decals on this. But again, just kind of work on the logos to what you need it to be, and then stop. Don't go any further for this. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the decals, and then I'm going to put safety stripes, and then we'll work on graffiti. This is just a look at it before I seal everything in, but I'm very satisfied with how it came out so far. The end reporting marks are interesting. They're just really oddly spaced apart, and they're different on both ends, so try to kind of copy that. But there's a good look at the side patching. I've already started to weather it up a little bit, and then I added the safety striping to the sides all the way down. So I proceeded to weather them up by adding the little paint chips and scrapes. Because remember, these things rub up against stuff all the time. They get pretty beat up. They start to rust away, especially on these rust buckets. They'll rust away. So always remember to weather your safety stripes quite a bit when you're doing that. So at this point, that's really just about done. What we got to work on now is the graffiti. And I got to do it on the opposite side, so the non-break-in side here. And if you look, it's pretty straightforward. It's just some scribble tag work there all the way down. And you can either do this with a paint pen, or you can do it with white acrylic. And in this case, I'll probably do a mix of the two. I'll probably use a paint pen for the thicker oversprayed graffiti, and then I'll just hand paint these really finely detailed small pieces. That way I can do them in complete detail. The rougher ones I'll just hand draw with the Jelly Roll ink pen, so that won't be too hard. But we already just about have a completed model here. The only other thing I got to do is start doing some powder work to it, which I won't show. Reinstall the trucks, I'll weather those up, and then I'll just give this a seal in. Now, I still haven't added the hatches, and I'm kind of at a point where I just want to wait. These are the hatches, I should say, that I got with the car, and they're the older style. What I need is the smooth style, similar to what's on these cars over here, the smooth base type there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get another Intermountain car on eBay, dirt cheap, that has the right hatch. I'll just take those off of it, swap them out, and that'll give me the correct hatch. So it's going to probably be a few days before I can get that part in, but once I do, I'll just paint them white, give them a very light weathering job, and that'll pretty much wrap the car up. So we're just about done with this thing. You can really see the beauty and the weathering work there. I think it looks really good. It speaks for itself. And again, I encourage you guys, if you want to do one of these, it's really not that hard. Just kind of follow these basic techniques I've shown you, and you should be able to get something pretty good. And don't forget, too, that INTX was not the only one that owned these cars either. I think AEX has a few. AEQX might have a couple. So there's a few different road owners that actually still have these cars that you can see around that are in tons of different varieties of weathering. So there's always a prototype to choose from. But I wanted to choose this one in particular just because of the weathering. And I'm definitely glad I did, because I think it turned out awesome so far. I'm just anxious to get it finished up so I can get to another model, but at this point she's just about done. Right, guys, well, since that last clip, it took a little bit more time than I thought to get those hatches in, and what happened was I ended up getting this car here, and I didn't look at the photos well enough to see that they actually had the same hatches that this one had, which is this style hatch. So I was back to square one on that, and I got this car, and I was like, well, shoot. And I didn't really want to have to buy a new Intermountain car to get the hatches for this thing, so I ended up talking to a friend, and he told me that Tangent actually makes these sets of these fiberglass hatches for their cars, and they make them separate. And I like the Tangent hatches compared to the IMs because these have much better detail. As you can see, they have the nice lock bar detail, the bolt detail, rivet detail. The hinges are nicely done. So in this case, I went on their website, I ordered a couple sets of these, and they came in today, and it's now been 2 weeks, like I said, since that last clip. So to experiment with this, I went back to my FMC Chemicals car, which I've been working on the side since I couldn't work on this one, and I test fit the Tangent hatch on this car, and as you can see, it's an absolute perfect fit. It just fits right in there on that trough, so it's perfect. The only thing you got to do is trim the little hinges down, because the Intermountain cars have the actual hinges on them so that you can take the hatch, pop it off, and actually move it so you can model it either open or close, which is pretty cool. But in order for the Tangent part to clear that, you got to trim those little hinges down a little bit to clear those hook-like details. So as you can see, I've done that on this car as a demonstration, and I'm basically going to do the exact same thing with my Pillsbury car. And again, here's the hatch now prepared, and I've painted this white with a little bit of Tamiya white primer. I've dull coated it, and it's ready to go and install on the car. In terms of weathering, this is going to be pretty simple, because all you got to do, once you install these on there, you just put a little bit of an oil rust wash. You can do an acrylic wash, you could just use powders if you want, and just kind of vary them up. Just remember that the lock bars are going to generally be a different color. Remember that they're going to get a little bit rustier because they are metal. So are the little hinges, those are metal pieces, so those are going to rust compared to the main body of the hatch, which is fiberglass. Most of the rust is going to be concentrated on those little parts. So when you're doing any detail work with hatches like this, make sure to rust those little parts. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in another car in as an example. And if we grab it here, here is another Tangent car. This is one of the INTX, the really nice XIC INTX cars. Take a look at the hatches, how I've done them. Notice that they have the fresh chalky rust on this. The hatches are pretty dirty. There's a lot of grime collected around those bolts, around those hinges. The hinges are pretty rusty compared to the hatch body. But notice that, again, that the lock bars are nicely rusted up on this. This is generally how you want to weather these unless they're brand new, but you rarely see brand new hatches on these cars, especially on these rust buckets, because they generally get very dirty very quick. So this is a good example of the weathering that I'm going to be proceeding to do on this hatch for this car. Basically after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a final dull coat on everything We're going to need to make sure that we seal all of this oil work in, all this graffiti work in. I'm also going to do a little bit of touch-up weathering to the graffiti. I want to kind of blend that into the car body sides a little bit, because as you can see, it's kind of popping out right now. It's pretty bright, so we just need to weather it up a little bit and dull it down. But this is kind of that point in time where you want to do any kind of final inspections, and if there's anything you want to change on this car, now is the time to do it before you seal it up. So that's the important thing. So hopefully in the next clip here, by the time you see this, it'll be a completed model, and we'll be able to look back and enjoy the work that I've created. Alright, here's the car finished up, and it turned out pretty good, as always. I like the rust on the sides. Overall, in review, I think I was able to accomplish the look pretty well. This isn't the best way to accomplish that patchy rust look. There are other ways you can do that, but for my particular car, I think the effect worked out pretty well. Especially like in the corner right there, I think it looks perfect. You can still see some of the gray underneath. I really like the patchwork and the beat up safety striping, and then the ghost lettering there was the really cool effect. That's the first time I've done it on a car like this. So that came out pretty good, and I like the placard. And then the detail work on the roof came out pretty well. Basically how I wrapped up this car was I reinstalled the tangent hatch after I modified it. I just weathered it up. I put all the weathering effects on it, as you can see there. Dirtied it up quite a bit. And then I did all the salt rust from the salt spillage. Over time it just eats up that metal, and you get this fresh dusty layer of corroded, really this just fine powdery rust that kind of accumulates and starts washing down. So you can actually see it basically is replicated to look like it just got loaded, and it got through a bit of rain, and then the rust basically reacted, formed over the area around the hatch underneath the walkway a little bit. So it's just this kind of dusty, patchy looking rust, and then again you see a lot of this on these kinds of cars. Some of the grain cars have this too, but not as bad. Generally they'll stay a little bit cleaner in terms of that kind of powdery rust, but the salt cars get that real big time. So that was just a combination of AIM Products powders, kind of varying between a dark rust and then a light rust, kind of a fresher rust to get that effect. Of course, I hit up the trucks and the couplers, things like that. That's the basic stuff. Did a little bit of mud splatter, hit up those under bays a little bit, gave them kind of a little bit of a wash. Did a little bit of powder work, but kind of kept them simple. And on the opposite side, it's again pretty much the same thing. This is the graffiti side, so you can see you have the graffiti kind of vary up. I really like the patchwork here, and I like the way that all came out. The graffiti looks really cool. Again, you got all the fine graffiti tag work, and then you got the thicker stuff there, which again is a combination of using the paintbrush method and then the paint pen method to do that. So I really like that, and again this rust streaking down the side just like that looks really nice. And again you can see that fresh chalky rust starting at the top there, ready to add another layer of rust to the side. So it's a pretty cool effect. One that's really cool. So I think I'm pretty happy with it. I really I don't have anything else to really say. The model speaks for itself here. I think you guys can agree with that. I really like the end reporting work there with the decals, the rust and everything else. It's just a really nice ratty old co-op hopper is what I like to call them. So it's ready to go into service on my salt train, and I'm really happy with it. So we'll see if we have any more hoppers I want to do. I know there's a couple that I was looking at, but I don't have models for them yet. I was going to film this FMC car, but it was so easy that I just went ahead and finished it up and just called it a day on that, so kind of skipped over that. But if I get any more of these really cool cars, maybe another Tangent custom scheme, I might weather that one up. But I want to go ahead and start switching up to some different rail cars, kind of give it a little bit more variety, because we've been doing a lot of hoppers lately. So I think this one will wrap up the series on covered hoppers for the moment. But if I find any more cool prototypes, I'll definitely try to film them for you guys, and hopefully you enjoyed this little run-through, walkthrough of my weathering on this particular car. Be sure to subscribe here on YouTube for more content, and be sure to stay tuned for the next video. Until next time, thanks for watching. Take it easy.